I've never heard the recording in progress voice before. All right, so here's the official welcome. Thank you everyone for coming out tonight to our Sturgis Library LGBTQ plus fiction celebration with AC Weiss, Sam J. Miller, Cassandra Khaw, and Richard Kadrey. Before we get going, I'm gonna read the author's bio so you can get to know them a little better because that's super important. So we've got AC Weiss's fiction has appeared in Clark's World, Apex Magazine, and several years' best anthologies. Her work has won the Sunburst Award for Excellence in Canadian Literature of the Fantastic, as well as twice more being a finalist for the Sunburst Award, twice being a finalist for the Nebula Award, and being a finalist for the Lambda Literary Award. She has 2 collections published with Lethe Press and a novella published by Broken Eye Books. Her debut novel, Wendy Darling, came out from Titan Books in June 2021, which was a couple days ago, so get excited for that. A new collection, The Ghost Sequences, will be published by Undertow Books in fall of 2021. In addition to her fiction, she contributes regular review columns to Apex Magazine and the book Smugglers. Find her online at www.acweiss.net. Then we have Sam J. Miller. Sam J. Miller is the last in a long line of butchers. He is also the Nebula Award-winning author of The Art of Starving and Blackfish City, which was a winner of the hopefully soon to be renamed John W. Campbell Award. He's a graduate of the Clarion Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Workshop. Sam lives in New York City and at samjmiller.com. His latest novel is The Blade Between, which is out right now. Then we have Cassandra Khaw. Cassandra Khaw is an award-winning game writer and former scriptwriter at Ubisoft Montreal. Khaw's work can be found in places like Fantasy and Science Fiction, Lightspeed, and Tor.com. Khaw's first original novella, Hammers on Bone, was a British Fantasy Award and Locust Award finalist, and their forthcoming novella, Nothing But Black and Teeth, will be published by Nightfire in October of 2021, and you'll be able to find it at the library when that happens. Finally, Richard Kadrey. Richard Kadrey is the New York Times bestselling author of the Sandman Slim Supernatural Noir series. Sandman Slim was included in Amazon's 100 science fiction and fantasy books to read in a lifetime and is in development as a feature film. Some of Kadrey's other books include The Grand Dark, The Everything Box, Dead Set, and Butcher Bird. He also writes screenplays and for comics such as Heavy Metal, Lucifer, and Hellblazer. So if everyone wants to give a silent round of applause because you're all muted, and welcome everyone. Imagine like studio or like stadium applause. That'd be great. So we're gonna get going with our first question, and we're gonna start with Allison. So Allison, if you could give us like the elevator pitch for one of your upcoming works, that would be great. And if elevator pitches like aren't your thing, like feel free to ramble, make it into whatever form you want it to be. So take it away, Allison.
So the slightly goofy elevator pitch, which is actually also somewhat true, for Wendy Darling, which is the novel that just came out on June 1st, is what if the movie Taken was also Peter Pan? Wendy Darling has a very specific set of skills that allow her to go back to Neverland and rescue her daughter Jane when she's kidnapped by Peter. That is how I sort of originally pitched the idea to myself when I started writing it. It was kind of like a haha, wouldn't that be funny? And then it actually turned into a novel. But it's also about mother-daughter relationships and found family, chosen family, female friendships, queer identity, and just how creepy Peter Pan is as a concept.
And after this,
do I have to pick who goes next?
To go. Oh no, it's we pick the first person, and then it's just free for all after that.
Everyone's staring at the cameras like deer.
That means you should go next, Cassandra.
No, I realized that by talking that instantly put me next in line, and I faintly regret everything. So Nothing But Black and Teeth is going to be my next novella. It is about a group of friends who decide to rent an ancient Japanese manor in the middle of nowhere to have a random little wedding. Unfortunately, these 5 people should have stopped being friends ages and ages ago. They did not, and terrible, terrible things happen because when you go to get married in a haunted house and hope to be scared, sometimes the house goes, well, okay, then if you insist.
Well, because I can say both those books are amazing,
Aw.
I will jump in and say that my book, The Blade Between, is about what happens when gentrification comes to the town with a secret. And when rich folks start moving into a spooky H.P. Lovecraft, Stephen King, Shirley Jackson style town, how do the supernatural elements respond? And the, spoiler alert is they do not respond well, and bloodshed and mayhem and tons of queer sex ensue. Richard, it's all you now.
All right. My next book is called King Bullet. It is volume 12 of the Sandman Slim series. It's also the last book of the series. So I wanted to do something different with it. Stark at the beginning of the book is kind of at loose ends. He's kind of semi-retired. He's actually working at Carlos's bar as a bouncer, but a killer comes to town called King Bullet, and he forms a little posse around him and causes all sorts of trouble. And when it gets close to Stark's friends, it makes him very nervous. And what happens in the end is that Stark finds out that there's a very specific reason King Bullet has come to town and why he wants to take over LA and keep going from there.
Awesome. Thank you everyone for your elevator pitch for your next book or the most recent book. Really appreciate it. The next question, we're going to start with Sam. And that question is in front of me somewhere. There we go. So for all the writers in the audience, what do you believe? Nope. Why did that? Yeah, no, that's what I want to say. Sorry. So question for Sam and everyone else. For all the writers out there, what do you believe is the most important craft advice you can give someone working in genre fiction today?
Go fucking nuts. Like, do the thing that you're scared of, the thing that you're excited about, the thing you think will never sell, the thing everybody tells you is too weird or too dirty or too whatever to sell. And, that's what I want. I want to read the crazy shit. Like, I think a lot of people do, and nothing appeals to everybody. But I think that if you find the fucked up, twisted, gnarled heart of what you love about reading and the stories that you love to read and put that on the page, it will find the people whose hearts are similarly gnarly and twisted and delightful.
Oh no, that was going to be my answer too, except we articulated it way better than I ever could. But I think riffing off of that, I definitely would say just keep writing endlessly. There are so many rejections. Social media is really that platform where no one really talks about how many things get rejected, how many proposals get turned down. It happens for everyone at every stage of their career. So just write and write and write. And if people say no, keep writing, because eventually your work's going to connect with someone who loves it. And who knows, the editor might ask if you have something in the your back pocket that no one else had loved just yet, and they might love it too. Just never stop writing, which sounds such a cliche when I say it like that.
So is it me next, or
Go ahead.
I'm next?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, I'm completely baffled by this. Wait, you're on camera? Why don't you go?
Okay. I was going to say something similar to Sam and Cassandra as well, in terms of, find what you're passionate about and write that. Find the thing that keeps you coming back and actually finishing the projects that you start. And don't be afraid to experiment and find, what works for you in terms of method. There's not really any sort of one size fits all writing advice. There's not any right way to do a writing career. So yeah, don't be afraid to try things and know that, not everything is going to work. Doesn't matter. Just keep going, keep, going back to it and keep pushing on and telling the stories that you want to read.
I agree with everything that's been said before. And the only thing I can add, because people have talked about keeping writing, the one thing I've figured out over the years, when it comes to somebody getting blocked. The way you keep writing, techniques for this stuff is the first thing, writing is more physical than we think it is. We think about just sitting at a typewriter all day, or a computer, or sitting with a pad and pen. There's a physicality to writing that I think we overlook, and it works in your brain. So my basic advice is, if you ever get stuck and you work on a computer, and you work on a computer, get away from the computer, write by hand. If you write by hand, and you get stuck, immediately go to a computer, typewriter, something else. Change the physicality of your work. And I think that triggers stuff in your brain that will help you get started again. And just free write, whatever. So if you're going onto the computer from paper, just free write. Don't even try to write the story for a while, and the story will start to creep back in. So that's the only other thing besides what's been said before.
Which is awesome advice, because I've never thought of that before. So I'm going to probably take that and incorporate it into my own life, because I need that sometimes, like right now, actually. We're going to jump to question 3. We're going to have Cassandra start us off on that one. And remember, you guys can answer in whatever order afterward, but Cassandra has to go first.
Okay.
So what changes in the literary landscape have you been excited to see in recent years? And what sort of publishing trends do you hope progress in like a positive fashion, or change for the future? Change for the better in the future?
So when you said that question out, I had something more like in depth and possibly more intelligent. But the thing that really gets to me now that you've asked me that again live on camera, I'm so happy that we're moving away from using the term Lovecraftian fiction. I love the fact that we're just slowly progressing towards just talking about cosmic horror just as a genre, and watching people reference writers like Victor LaValle instead of H.P. Lovecraft. Like, that's so good. And I hope this continues. Like, we see it as well in the awards, people literally changing the faces of the awards, renaming the awards, interrogating the history behind some of these awards. And I hope we keep doing that. I think it's important. Names matter, words matter.
Absolutely. One thing I like is that we're no longer going on and on and on about, the golden ascended high masters like Heinlein and Asimov and that era that we've, it feels like, and if you love those guys, good for you. They're useful. But I think we've created over the last 20, 25 years, a whole new set of writers who aren't old straight white guys, who are filling those roles as the inspiration for new writers, even for people who've been writing for a while and want to try something new. I like seeing this new pantheon of neo-masters. That's a really crappy term. Of newer people that are inspiring me, and I know other people. Yeah, I'm tired of the old guys. I grew up with those guys, and they were great when I was 15. And I don't think they work the same way for 15-year-olds now. I think they'd laugh at them.
Yeah, I mean, N.K. Jemisin won the Hugo Award for Best Novel 3 years in a row. Like, that's the world I want to live in. Like, that's, we're definitely in a place where great shit from lots of amazing folks is being published, and finding audiences and winning awards and selling a ton of copies. And that's amazing. I think that we are also, especially just speaking like in terms of queer lit, I think we're seeing like a real rich breadth of queer lit, including the stuff that doesn't show, like where we are allowed to be problematic, where we're allowed to be flawed, where we're not all about like, adorable falling in love YA stories, not that there's anything wrong with those, or noble suffering, fighting for justice stories, not that there's anything wrong with those. Like I feel like there was a real sort of like revolution in queer lit in the 80s that kind of like just kind of was, for want of a better term, killed because so many of the best writers and publishers and editors and agents died of HIV/AIDS. And I've always felt like that was like a stillborn revolution, and to see like another revolution happening of like amazing queer shit finding its way into people's lives is really exciting.
I agree with everything that everybody's said so far. And I'd also say one thing that I've seen, especially in a lot of short fiction, is we're starting to see a lot more of translated fiction and fiction coming from international authors. And I think the rise of online publications has really helped with that. I mean, there's so many publications now that have either done, special issues dedicated to translated fiction, or they make it part of their, regular day-to-day business, or their publishing model is to do everything bilingually. There's places like Samovar, which I think is connected to Strange Horizons and Constellation. And it's just really wonderful to see. And I hope, that that's a trend that continues and we start to see even more of that. And again, I think, just, online submission systems, or the fact that writers can now submit things to publications via email, has really opened it up to international authors, as well as, not having to deal with weird mailing things and, spending a fortune on postage and not knowing whether, anything's going to come of it or not. So it's been really great to see, sort of the broadening in terms of, it's not just North American centric in North American publications anymore.
All awesome answers. I think another cool thing also really quickly is there's more novellas coming out these days, and who doesn't love a novella? Because I do. Next question, we're going to start with Richard. What draws you to the subjects, genres, characters, and settings for your novels and short stories?
I think it's simply where I live. Ever since I was a kid, I was the weird kid in the neighborhood. I lived in New York when I was young, and the whole history of television is on New York all the time. And after school every day, you had to watch Superman so you could talk about it in school the next day. I'd seen all the Supermans when I was, at a certain age, but then Astro Boy came on. And I started watching what I had no idea was the first generation of anime. And I started watching that instead of Superman. And that was a big deal in my neighborhood growing up. So I think growing up in sort of like this sort of secret world in which I already liked what people call dark things. I don't think of them as dark. Horror, science fiction, mysteries. I've loved that stuff my whole life. And I kind of feel it's like my neighborhood. Like my neighbors are monsters, and that's fine. We all put our trash out, at night at the same time. And some of theirs has limbs and wearable parts hanging out of it, but that's fine. I'm real comfortable there. And I think I'm going to be there the rest of my life, and I'm pretty happy about it. Oh, you laughed. You got to go.
I really am just enjoying that long silence after the first person gets called, and the remaining three just kind of stare, just like, oh crap, wait, who, what? Anyway, I think I'm supposed to talk now. I tend to get drawn to, I think, fairy tale archetypes. I'm interested in mermaids. I'm especially interested in animal wives. And then I think a large part of it is because they're so mistreated in the older fiction. The mermaid just evaporates into foam. I don't like that. I would very much prefer my mermaids have teeth and devour the people who are trying to be terrible to her. Animal wives, as well, as a thing that I keep coming back to. And I think it has a lot to do with being a queer Asian woman who grew up in a very traditionally Asian family. And like I empathize very strongly the idea of just having the essence of who you are, the feralness of you being taken away and you being told there is a perfect little spot for you, do this thing, spend your whole life doing it. And all my animal wives are very angry about that, and again have this penchant for eating people who insist on terrible things. So yeah, that is why I get drawn to. I get drawn to people who are locked up and told to sit down, and I want them to be set free.
I feel like I've always sort of both as a reader and a writer been drawn to a lot of horror, but at the same time, I also find myself very drawn to found family stories and queer found family stories, specifically stories of queer joy. And I think it's that balance actually of like, you know, the two sides kind of my reading and writing tastes is that sort of what I want to see in the world, that even when there is darkness, you know, there's a hope and there's the idea of people coming together and overcoming together, you know, people having each other's backs and looking out for each other. So even when there are dark times, you know, you're not alone. So that's sort of the two sides of my reading and writing tastes coming together to sort of inform the vision I want for the world, I guess.
I have no idea. and you know, I wrote a young adult fantasy and then followed it up with a dystopian science fiction for not so young adults. And then I wrote a horror. I just, you know, The Blade Between is like a horror story. So so the short answer is I don't know. The long answer is shit about the housing crisis and gentrification and oppression and resistance, but through the lens of a wide range of genres that you know, will constantly be a surprise to me. Like there's a spy, like 1930s, like spy thriller nudging me in the ribs right now. And I'm like, you stay away from me. I don't need this in my life.
But we do.
We'll see. I've lost better fights than this one, Cassandra.
Got to follow your own advice though. Make it super weird. And I mean, so many, all the like the weird noir kind of like crime thrillers that are coming out, like several people here have written those also, are amazing. And I love them. And they circulate really well at the library. So things to consider. We're going to jump over back to Allison now. So yeah, I always love book recommendation questions. So which LGBTQ plus books are you excited about that have either like recently come out or like are on the horizon for coming out? And what upcoming or up and coming writers are you excited for people to get on their radars?
I'm going to try to limit myself because this is the kind of thing that I can probably literally talk about all night. But I will start by recommending the work of all my fellow panelists. I think, as I've said before, I love The Blade Between that Sam had come out in December. I'm really looking forward to Cassandra's Nothing But Blackened Teeth. A recent one that I really loved was Caitlin Starling's The Luminous Dead, which is kind of sci-fi horror with very messed up queer relationships, kind of exploring power dynamics and kind of going to what, you know, Sam's point before about, you know, having queer characters that are allowed to be flawed and allowed to be kind of messed up and not this sort of perfect, you know, shining example in order to be accepted. Two that came out from AJ Fitzwater last year that I really loved. Their collection, Sinrak the Dapper, which is about capybara lesbian pirates, which is just joyful and fun and absolutely delightful. And it's all sort of interconnected stories. So you could almost read it like a mosaic novel, but it is technically, I think, a short story collection. And they also had what's either a novella or a very short novel called No Man's Land, about land service girls in the war, and also shape changing and a little bit of sort of like the animal bride theme, but more about sort of the shape changing. And I'm also, I said I would limit myself, and that's a lie because I'm just going to, you know, ramble on and on, but I've got a couple more to mention. I'm really looking forward to Lee Mandalow's Summer Suns, which I think is out either this summer or this fall. And there's also a lot of really great queer short fiction, authors that might not have, a collection yet, or might not have a novel yet, so might not be on people's radar, but really should be. And I'll name just a few, again, trying to limit myself. Suzanne Palumbo, Charles Pacer, Merck Van Wolfmore, Kel Coleman, and John Wiswell. And that's just to name a few. And again, I can go on. And if anybody needs more recommendations, reach out to me and I will shout at you for hours about reading.
I have the opposite problem where I will read a ton of amazing stuff and love it. And then as soon as someone asks me that question, I'll be like, let me check my Goodreads right quick. So while Allison was answering that so well, I checked my Goodreads. No, so actually I haven't had a problem with this lately because my number one recommendation, like if you read one queer book this year, you should read a lot. But Summer Suns by Lee Mandello is amazing and scary and sexy and dark and twisted and wonderful. So I definitely recommend that. And Fireheart Tiger by Eliette de Bedard, who's one of my very favorite contemporary genre writers. Those are the two like out now or out recently or out soon books. Older books, I've only really recently discovered Poppy Z. Bright, who's fucking amazing, and Drawing Blood might be my favorite horror novel now. And I just read Sacrament by Clive Barker, which was really fascinating and wonderful. And I'm always like, just when I think I know how amazing and rich and queer the history of horror is, I'm like, oh, right, I missed that book for decades.
Oh, I'm really excited about Summer Suns. I just dug into my advanced reading copy. The amount of atmosphere in there is just stellar. One of the names I want to throw in here, and I will continue shouting their name in every single panel I'm in, Zinni Rockland. Their debut novella, I think, is coming out this year, Flowers for the Sea. And it is an quietly angry book with very muscular prose. And there's just so much intensity to it, just so much growing fury. And the way that book builds up, and I'm not spoiling anything because it is just wonderful to discover. It builds up to this one single sentence at the end. And I remember just putting down my Kindle and going, oh my. And just being stunned. I needed to have this moment of silence after reading the book. It's great. And there is another that recently got announced. The title of the book is Leech. Before the panel, I desperately tried to find a pronunciation guide for the author's name. I could not find one, and I refused to mangle another person's name. But it is amazing. It is very gothic. It is set in this like winter ravaged place in a castle, and a doctor arrives to find that her predecessor had died of a parasitic infection. But what's interesting about this, like this alone would have been a really cool premise, is the main character is actually a host for this distributed intelligence of a parasite. And this actually comes true in the prose, the way the author discusses what it's like to be spread out across multiple bodies, how that pulls together, the comfort that they find, and also just the weirdness of it, the sheer alienness of it is amazing. They managed to make it this deeply compassionate book that makes you go, I can see why this is reassuring. And then in the next paragraph, you're reminded that there is a parasite in all of these people, and it is terrible, it is mercenary, and it's this alien thing who destroys lives. And that's just the start of it. You need to put it in your pre-order list already. It's good. It is so good.
What is
I
it
get
called?
excited about talking about books too.
Sam mentioned Poppy Z. Bright, and I am trying to remember the title of their serial killer romance. Do you know that one?
Exquisite Corpse?
Yes, definitely recommend that one. The story I heard is that the Canadian border guards, when someone was traveling across the border with that manuscript, got pulled over by the cops, and they didn't want to let They didn't want to let him go because he had Poppy's manuscript and they thought he really was a serial killer documenting his crimes. So that's reason enough, I think, to track the book down. The other book, Cassandra probably won't like this, is that I'm going to talk about is The All-Consuming World. Her science fiction novel, which is, God, there's a lot in that book. It's science fiction, cyberpunk, lesbian clones, betrayal, abuse, action, explosions, spaceships, all the stuff you want, but in a way I've never quite seen before. So I'm really looking for, I mean, I've read it, obviously, but I think it's something really to look forward to. I think it's going to blow some people's minds.
Aw. Now I'm just going to be embarrassed for the rest of the panel.
Aw.
Can I just first of all thank Cassandra for modeling how to, like, there was a book that I was thinking of recommending, but I didn't know how to pronounce the author's name, and I felt really bad. But that was a really amazing way to do it, because I'd rather make the recommendation, but I'd also don't want to mispronounce someone's name. So In the Watchful City is coming out in the next year, and it's amazing, and it's really good, and you should all add it to your TBRs.
Excellent. So many things to add to the lists. Another reminder, because we are a library, we can get you all of these books, all of them for free if you would like, but also go out and buy books to support the industry, because if you don't do that, oh God, the terror. But yeah, all those books will be available pretty soon. One thing I was thinking about, we've talked about Poppy Z. Bright a lot. It also makes me think of Caitlin Kiernan, because they used to write stuff together and they had like a blog and stuff. I don't know a whole lot about that, but I'm always pushing Caitlin Kiernan's work on people. So check out their the best of Caitlin Kiernan if you're looking for some good, weird horror sci-fi fantasy short stories. Who are we on to now? Is it Sam's turn? I believe it is Sam's turn. Sam, starting off. Are there any elements of horror, science fiction, fantasy that you personally think need more exploration? And are there any topics or tropes that you believe have been overdone and need to have some new spicing up happen?
Yes. I think that I've also been like really, I have a very ambivalent, well, it's not really ambivalent. I just don't like H.P. Lovecraft, even though like there's a lot of aspects of H.P. Lovecraft's work that I enjoyed a lot when I was younger. But I like the fact that like all these writers who are like re-examining that mythos through lenses of queer perspectives, people of communities of color, and how they exist in worlds like that. I think that being able to sort of like reclaim the shit we love, even though it's problematic, or the great stuff that is sort of formative, that's always like an exciting thing for me, is when writers dig into stuff and sort of like appropriate and in the best way of like taking something and making it exciting and relevant for who we are and where we are now. And as for tropes that need reimagining, I mean, I think everything needs to be queerer. You just need to add queer to anything. And I think that I'm sure if I thought about it for a while, I could think of lots of examples of like, yeah, no one's done the queer version of The Blob, but yeah, just make the queer version of blank. And I call on Richard.
That was cruel. This is one of those kind of questions that if I sat down for the evening, I could answer easily. But like my brain vapor locks on tropes. And it's like, oh fuck, how many of those do I violate? In my work, and I have to go back and yank things out and burn them before anybody sees them. The Lovecraft thing is really interesting to me, because we keep coming back to it as in the world of fantasy and science fiction. And I think what's interesting to me about it is it shows the weight of not the work, the work, but both Lovecraft as a terrible person, but a brilliant conceptualist, and how in the history of science fiction and fantasy, we have a million of those not great people who, you know, had great influence over the field and were held up as heroes. And I guess what I'm getting to is not this sort of the trope of writing, but the trope of who's a hero, and being really thoughtful and concerned about that, and looking maybe past the prose, and seeing. I think we're in a time when we can just sort of see a whole combination of both the artist and the art in a new way. And I think over the last few years, we've introduced a lot of new, interesting people. And I think that has a chance to create those new heroes that people can look up to for a long time to come. So yeah, I guess jerks and not jerks is the trope I want to see reworked.
I'm going to fling myself into this since my thought was kind of weirdly relevant to both your answers. More messy queers. Sam touched on it earlier, but I just want to see queer people allowed to be as terrible as everyone else instead of having to be gently put on a pedestal, because I think it ends up being something that people internalize and worry about in public. Like, oh no, the only way I'm allowed to be a queer person is if I am a shining example of my identity. And that's kind of terrible. That should be people who do all kinds of things. Jessica Jones was, the first season Jessica Jones was when I really went, oh shit, this is exactly what I've always wanted. I think they gender bent the lawyer whose name I cannot remember. And she was this ruthless shark of a woman who was cheating on her wife, who was just absolutely terrible and mercenary and Machiavellian. And that's kind of great to see. I would like that more for queer people. And I think of people of color as well in general. Just like marginalized people should be allowed to be all kinds of things, including villains. But not in that way that cishet people tend to write queer people as villains. But you know what I mean.
Not villainous because they're queer, villainous because they're villainous.
They
and they also happen to be queer.
Yes.
I'm going to just sort of tack on to what everybody else said in terms of just more queerness everywhere. I am definitely up for queering the canon, whether that is the canon of science fiction, fantasy, and horror, or the literary canon. I always want to see more of that. I love genre mashups as well, like noir fantasy or sci-fi horror. I think that's kind of a fun way to put sort of a fresh spin on some of those tropes that, you know, may or may not need refreshing. Something I always love to see and see, you know, people playing with. But I feel like everybody else has sort of covered what I would have said anyways. So that's just my little addition.
I always just want someone during these trope ones to be like, I hate werewolves. I never want to see them again. No one ever does that. But I actually love werewolves, so nothing against werewolves. I write lots of werewolf stuff for some reason.
Werewolves are awesome.
I know. I love
Pick it up on Werewolves after Mongrels by Stephen Graham.
So good.
Best werewolf novel ever.
Yes.
So
I'm just,
good.
there's no way for me to reach, much less top something like that. So werewolves are in the shelved for me for the moment.
I mean, it could have been queerer. I mean, it's my favorite novel. I'm just saying, if you write the book but make it super queer, then I mean, it wouldn't be better, but it would be amazing. Just
yes. I need to jump in because anytime anyone mentions Mongrels, I have to bring it up in case you haven't read it. There's this one section where Stephen Graham Jones goes into, okay, werewolves are not allowed to wear any fishnet stockings or just stockings. And he just sets it up in the most hilarious way. And you're like, haha, this has to be funny. A werewolf in stockings. And then he dismantles that idea and just explains exactly why this is absolutely terrible on an anatomical level. And you're like, how did someone make it so funny and so terrifying in a single paragraph? And it works so organically. If you haven't read that, I think we all love mongrels here. You really should read that book. It is very good.
If you're looking for a queer kind of werewolf story, the first story in, oh my God, I'm blanking on her name. No, Laura Morrow. Bam, there we go. The collection's title is, why did I do this to myself?
Is it one of the foxes?
The name of the story is Sundogs, and it's amazing. It's like one of the best short stories I've ever read. And whoo boy, it's doing everything you guys are talking about. So if you want to check that out, why can't I remember?
Who's the author?
Laura Morrow?
Is that Sing Your Sadness Deep? Is it that collection?
It is Sing Your Sadness Deep. Also from Underhill Publications. It's outrageously good. Is that a link straight to it, Cassandra?
Yes, I got overexcited.
Good job. So everyone, if you look in the chat, Cassandra has put a link to Sundogs. Oh God, is it good? It's like that whole collection is really worth it for that story alone, and it's a great collection. I'm rambling, and I'm going to refocus. The final question before the Q&A is going to start with Cassandra. This is my favorite question to always ask. If you had a time machine and can go back to talk to the younger version of yourself, what advice would you give yourself, whether writing or life-wise?
Oh no, I'm utterly blanking out. I guess life is inevitably going to be hard for you because you are a queer woman of color who comes from an Islamic country. And that is kind of stacked up there. But it's always going to be worth it. Writing is always going to be worth it. No matter the heartbreak initially, eventually you get to where you're going. You just have to keep pushing, I guess. Oh my God, that kind of question is always with me. So I call on Sam.
Okay, see, I like direction. Yeah, there's gonna be, hey kid, hey Sam, there's some stories that you're really scared of that are really important to you, that are a part of you that you are afraid to tell, and that you think are too gnarly and nasty and disturbed and that no one will want them, and you have to write them. And the longer you spend avoiding writing them, the harder it's going to be. So you should just go to that place that you're scared to go to, because until you can tell the story that means the most to you, you're not going to be able to sort of, I don't know, there's an Avatar reference in here somewhere about, you can't enter the Avatar state until you've mastered all 4 elements, and I'm not good enough to pull that off, the analogy. So yes, you got to learn all the elements, and that involves going to the place you're scared of. AC.
Probably advice I would still give myself now is just never pass up an opportunity to learn, whether it's from your peers or from the community in general, from professional conferences and workshops and reading other books. Just, keep learning, never sort of, assume that you know things and that you've kind of gotten to a point where it's good enough. Keep pushing yourself and keep trying more, ambitious things, and yeah. To keep going. I don't know, I sort of lost the thread there. Focus. Maybe I would tell myself that. Focus.
I think what I would go back and tell my younger self is just sort of a general say yes to more things. It's really easy to be scared, and being afraid and living in fear becomes a weird kind of comfort, because you're safe and you know where you are and you know your stance with the world. But try saying yes to more stuff, whether it's work, life, art, sexual identity, anything important in your life. If an opportunity comes up when you're younger, especially, don't just go to no when it's scary. Think about it one more time, give it another beat, and see if you can say yes to it.
I think that is an awesome way to end our planned question section. Thank you so much, Richard. Another piece of advice that I actually very much need in my life all the time. All the advice, all the time, just get it tattooed all over myself so I can remember these things. So yeah, before we jump into the Q&A, I'm going to post another link to where everyone can find the author's books. Like I said in the beginning, it's really important to support our writers that we love, to support the art that we love. So if you're able to do it, please feel free to buy a book from the link. Most of these writers have a ton of books to choose from. So like, pick your favorite genre and just go to town. But also remember that libraries are always there if you do not have the ability to support local or to support writers at the moment. Like if you need any book, we can at Sturgis Library get it from you from any state in the United States. We can get them from Canada. Sometimes we get them from Mexico. So we can get them from anywhere. So just come in and get some books. Yeah, so now we're going to turn this over to some Q&A. So the chat is open. So if anyone wants to throw over some questions, we'll do Q&A for about like 20 minutes. And then everyone gets to go home, which most of you are probably already there. Yeah, so send those questions.
And in the meantime, we'll dance.
Don't make me do that.
I want to get everyone in a panel to group dance one of these days.
Like a flash mob, but not.
Right.
Distributed flash mob.
Alice, can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
In the background of your screen to the left of your head, is that a Beanie Baby dragon?
It is.
Good eye.
I had that as a child, and that was like my dearest possession when I was very young. And I don't know what's happened to it since then.
Baby dragons around here. This one's kind of like the large plushy version, and then
I had the small one.
another one up here. I've also got plush corgis up here and a giant stuffed cow that you can't see. I'm a big fan of like cramming my bookshelves with all kinds of books, obviously, but you know, the things that aren't books as well.
But I was gonna say those things have very specific feeling wings, like they were made out of a very weird texture, and like that's
like
a strange memory. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got some stuff coming in from Christy. Christy asks, is there any genre trends that you have seen coming that you are really excited about?
I see Cassandra nodding. That means she gets to answer first.
Cozy books. There are
Cozy
so
books.
many more cozy books in spec fic now. I'm thinking of Becky Chambers' books. I'm thinking of Ursula Vernon's book. The one with the terrifying sourdough starter familiar for one. There's just
It's won the Nebula.
yeah. Oh shit. Yeah, I forgot. She did. It is really good. And it's so interesting to see people just nestle this deeply cozy, warm stories in worlds that are not necessarily nice. The plot, everything is still excellent, but you kind of feel like you're wrapped up in a warm hug. And I'm seeing more and more of that, and I really am into it. Also, I need to stop talking, otherwise I'm going to start recommending authors and never stop.
Gideon the Ninth is the trend that I've been waiting for, and I didn't know it. I came to it a little late, but I just finished it and I adored it, and I want more super queer hot mess. You know, what the fuck is going on in this books?
Yeah. I'm so happy with novellas right now. I just think it's the best thing. And for the first time in my life, I have like more novellas in a stack than regular books. And I'm just finding so many writers. I'm finding a lot of new writers that way too. And it's a great introduction to people. It's a great way to tear through a lot of material and then maybe look for longer works by those people too. But the intensity that a novella can have is just really appealing to me.
Like I've seen a lot of sort of like climate-based fiction or ecological climate change stuff lately, and that might just be sort of a reflection of people's anxieties, but I feel like it is also very rich material for science fiction, fantasy, and horror. Thinking, Jeff Vandermeer's works, Alex Beckett's Game Changer and Deal Breaker, and I don't know if they're planning a third book or if it's just a duology, but those are both wonderful books. I feel like there are other titles that I'm not thinking of at the moment, but I do kind of enjoy that sort of trend of, ecologically based science fiction, fantasy, and horror.
I always support the environmental horror and environmental sci-fi and any kind of fiction. It's always great. We do a lot of programs on that stuff at the library, so it's very important to us. We got a question coming in from Marilyn. Marilyn asks, when reviewers say, quotation mark, this author writes like bracket, whoever the new Lovecraft is, bracket, etc., do you think that's good, or do you prefer to be compared to someone else? Like, do you prefer to be compared to older writers so people can anchor you in like the genre, or would you prefer like new writers be your comp titles? I think that's what I'm saying.
I'll say it depends on whether I like the author. Like a reviewer said that The Blade Between was like Stephen King meets James Baldwin, and like there is no greater compliment, and I died. So yes, in that case, it was amazing. I'm sure if I didn't like it, if I didn't like the author, I would probably be annoyed by it. But it can be helpful. I mean, comps are useful. I don't have a problem with it.
I guess in terms of helping people find your work, especially if it is, sort of an established author, like if you like this, you might like this type of thing. But yeah, I guess if I were, compared to, I think maybe even if I were compared to an author whose work I didn't personally like, it's, a matter of personal taste. Maybe it would, I don't know, help new audiences find my work. I'm not sure. I mean, I'd prefer not to be, compared to somebody who's a horrible person on a personal level.
I think
I'm a bit, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I'm okay with comps in general. Like, it does help people figure out what your writing's gonna be like. It makes it very easy for people to figure out if they will like you. I will expand on that slightly to say, like, as a woman of color, it's always very slightly disconcerting if like there is an excerpt that I post online or something, and people are like, "Oh, where did you quote this from? Is this a Neil Gaiman book or something?" And I'm like, there's something very just odd if you're a woman of color and somebody mistakes their work for a white man's work. Yeah, that's my personal pet peeve.
I don't mind. I think I'm a bit like AC. I don't mind being compared to people whose work I don't necessarily love. I just don't want them to be incompetent. Just don't want it to be someone horrible. That's all I ask.
That's hilarious. That's so good. The next question we got coming in is from, my scrolling's not working. It's from Todd. Todd asks, in stories where you follow more than one character's point of view, how do you ensure that each character has a distinct voice? This is something I find difficult, so I'm very curious of how you all get to do it. How you all do it.
Bridget made a noise. I guess he's starting.
Oh, I made a noise. Was it me?
Yeah, we heard you, huh?
Yeah. Well, we were talking about my book, The Everything Box, earlier before this started, and the Everything Box, I think, probably has something like 12 points of view. And for me, it always started with not the chapter, not the scene, not the plot. It was just getting characters talking. And I think it's as simple as just, especially at the beginning, letting your characters just yammer on for a while. And that's how you're going to find their voice. That's how you're going to find their point of view. It's just letting them go on and on for a while. And that's when the little things slip out, like, oh, this character is this way, but has this quirk that seems uncharacteristic for that kind of person. It's little stuff like that. So I would just say, think about your character and just kind of automatic write. I'm a big fan of automatic writing, and just let them talk. And at a certain point, you're going to feel like, I got it. And then you can move on to the next one.
Sentence length. That's my big hack. If one character writes in long sentences with a lot of clauses, and somebody else speaks in shorter sentences, that is my shortcut to differentiating, especially if it's a short story and I don't have the space to really differentiate who the characters are. Like a quick rhythmic distinction is super helpful for me.
So stealing that.
Yes.
It is yours.
I would try to think about, like, you know, what experiences the characters had that might sort of inform their choices or the way they see the world, or, you know, particular likes or dislikes that are, even if it's not, if that stuff's not directly on the page, it's just sort of background that's kind of informing their voice and their choices and kind of everything they do throughout the work. I don't know if it's successful or not, but that's what I try to do at the very least.
So my day job is in video games, and I tend to write a lot of like VO scripts and stuff. And what I've discovered that works in video games that works surprisingly well in like doing multiple POVs in books is reading everything out loud. Just act out every character voice, every line that they do, and really get into it. The only drawback of this method, so I was in my mother's house when I was writing a gangsterish character for a game, and I did the world's worst Marlon Brando impression as I was going through my lines. And it was about 2 a.m. in the morning. And about 20 minutes of me just reading through it, I hear my mother going, "What the hell are you doing?" And I'm like, oh no. So if you try that hack, don't do it with people around you.
Hilarious. Oh God. Again, a bunch of stuff I'm going to be stealing. This is great. Just putting it all in my writer's toolbox. The next one we got is from Michael. So how do I want to phrase this? Do you give conscious thought to actively queering up your characters, your plots, and your stories? Or does the queer content spontaneously arise as you develop your stories?
I went first last time.
You said it gives me the noise, so you have to go first.
No. I'm not going first, but then you came in second, so you have to go first.
No, I guess. Like, it is so much a part of the lived experience. It just kind of happens. Like, it feels natural. Writing straight relationships, on the other hand, feels a lot more complicated and difficult.
Yeah, sometimes, oh, sorry, Allison, were you going to say something?
Sorry. Yeah, I was just going to sort of agree and say, I think, you know, for me, it's really just sort of spontaneous. It naturally happens. I never find myself sitting down to think, I will write a queer character. I will add 10% more queerness to this. It's just sort of, you know, what the story calls for, sort of, you know, trying to reflect the world the way it actually is. You know, I can't imagine sitting down to think, I will write a heterosexual character. I will add 10% more heterosexualness. It just, yeah, it's just sort of a spontaneous, natural thing.
Yeah, sometimes I will find myself feeling like, you know what, I love straight women. I should have a straight woman protagonist. And then I'll write it, and then I'll be like, no, this isn't working. So yeah, sometimes I'll try to vary it up, and usually that doesn't end well. But an interesting like problem that I sometimes have when thinking through queer characters is like, oh, well, I really want this character to do this, but is it going to be problematic if, like, you know, am I going to fall into like the, you know, like, why does every story end with a gay guy getting killed? Like that's something that I feel like I defaulted to in many instances. and realizing that that's sort of like not the way every gay story has to end. Even though I am in favor, as we've said, of queer people making terrible decisions in stories, sometimes I do sort of have to reevaluate plots based on who the characters are, and what I think is going to be it's going to best serve this character in this story.
Yeah, me too. Just the characters know who they want to be, and especially when you get a bunch of them together and you see the relationships from your real life and the relationships between the characters, they'll define themselves if they have any intelligence, and you hope you're writing intelligent characters.
There's always the hope, right? The next one we got coming in is from Susan. Susan says, I'm always curious about process. What's hard for you and what is the easy part for you? I want to know this too.
I personally find drafting easy and I hate editing. I don't know, it's the part I just like, I'll do anything other than that. Oh, I think, the house needs to be vacuumed again, or all the laundry needs to be redone, to just avoid the editing phase. That always seems to be the hard part for me. I don't say that I'm necessarily getting it right in the draft, but that's like the exciting, like rushing through to get the words on the page and then going back to it and realizing, oh no, it's all terrible and broken and now I have to fix it, and I don't want to do that.
For me, it's the first couple of chapters. I could have in a book an idea of what the book is, but that first paragraph has to feel good, then the first page, then that first chapter. And it's like, all right, we're going somewhere. Does this actually have any momentum? And then there's a second chapter. If I can get through 2 chapters, and they don't have to be long, like 2 chapters can be under 10,000 words, then I feel like I have a book. I have some kind of through line here. But yeah, those little beginnings, first paragraph, first page, first chapter, and then second chapter, that's when it becomes real. And that's really hard for me.
Different every time for me. Sometimes it's drafting, and then the editing is super easy, and then the next time it's the opposite. It's whatever is wrong with me at any given moment. This time I hadn't, usually I have no problem coming up with a plot, but now I'm really stumped, and now there are too many POV characters, and how are they going to kill each other in the end? So this is this insane bulletin board covered in crazy person strings and posters is not working. So yeah, it's always a different horrible problem.
I think finding the voice of the prose is really easy. I enjoy prose just on the craft level, so it's always fun for me. The hard part is plotting. I am learning how to plot longer and longer things, and it is terrifying and difficult because I look at it, I'm like, this is incredibly obvious. If I set it all down, what do I do? What if it's obvious to everyone else? And I'm actually doing a duology with Richard over here. And he spends a lot of his time going, no, this is fine. This will not be obvious to the reader. We can do this. Also, stop rushing through this bit. There can be more. This is how pacing works on a longer novel. So I'm glad to have somebody teach me the most difficult part of it for me.
I'm really excited now.
Right.
I think it's going to be fun. I think so. I think I always, again, getting things started. It's like I was so nervous at first about this, and now we're far enough in that crazy shit's happening. Body parts are flying around. There's a lot of cocaine, and we're in the subways of New York. So I think this is going to be fun for people.
Ooh, very excited. Very, very excited. Marilyn just wanted to clarify, I think I butchered her question about, she meant, do you prefer to not be compared to anyone else? And then Sam answered a little bit, but I apologize on that one, Marilyn. Marilyn's in one of my book groups. We're homies, so it's great. Marilyn's a great reader and reads all sorts of weird stuff all the time, which is wonderful. Thank you, Marilyn. Here we go. Okay, so from Sam, not Sam, but other Sam, who's my friend Sam, who is also my friend Sam. Oh no, Sam asks, do the politics of queerness in your country of origin shape the world building of your stories?
I guess I'll jump
Probably.
in.
I mean, all your assumptions about life kind of come from wherever you're from. And that can change over time, but that takes a while to become aware of yourself and the larger world. But I mean, I lived in San Francisco for over 20 years. So yeah, it wasn't hard to find gay characters for my books, but I consider San Francisco much more of an influence than America or the world. You know what I mean? It was less the giant versus the compressed city that had an effect on me.
It's weird, like growing up in Malaysia, things were very difficult for the queer community there. It's an Islamic country. I love the place to death. It was deeply multicultural. It's still deeply multicultural, but certain things were embedded in the culture that was kind of problematic. And I think the weird way that sort of shaped my world building is I wanted worlds that were anything but that. Like it just, no, none of that quiet, none of that needing to be cautious, none of the worrying. Which is probably why my queer characters shoot everyone and everything and swear so goddamn much.
I mean, I'll say that I think that the queer politics of my country did have a big influence on me, but like the queer politics of my country when I was coming of age in the 1990s, and so sort of like, you know, the transformation of like the way queer identity has transformed since then, and the ways in which like having access to queer culture is now a thing, is amazing, and I love it and I take part of it, but often like my mentality around it was really sort of formed at a time when, like, you know, sex was something that happened, that was very like, that would like happened through really challenging and difficult maneuvers and might be a death sentence. So it's interesting the way that like the moment in time of which you come of age sort of like locks in a lot of ideas, some of which can be very limiting and some of which can make it really hard to sort of like see what's going on and get excited about what's happening, what the world feels like for queer folks coming of age right now.
Yeah, I think it's like less the queer politics of Canada or even Montreal specifically, where I grew up, but more sort of just personal experiences, I guess. And I guess I was pretty lucky in terms of, you know, being surrounded by people who were sort of open-minded and accepting and supportive for the most part. So, I mean, I try to, you know, for the most part, when I'm writing, I guess, relationships in general, around queer people, I'm always trying to sort of include that supportive, accepting, you know, the idea of community and the I've got your back kind of thing.
Awesome. And we've reached our last question for the night, which is it's a very great question, especially considering like I always am a big fan of this sort of stuff. How important have mentors been for your development as writers? This is coming from Andreas, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Mentors.
I think in my case, it's been more sort of peer groups than mentors specifically, but just finding, you know, a group of other writers kind of going through things at the same time, having a reliable critique group to give feedback and, you know, help me find flaws, help me when I'm stuck, that type of thing that sort of led to a lot of my development as a writer.
I think it's very similar for me. It's a lot to do with peer groups, knowing what your peers in the industry are doing, having the right people to talk to, bounce ideas from, just grow and learn with. I don't think I ever had the privilege of mentors, but I'm very glad for people who get them. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, I was really fortunate and privileged to go to Clarion, the Clarion Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Workshop in 2012, where I had amazing teachers. Ted Chiang was a professor, and he's like my favorite short story writer, and that's why I applied. And I was really lucky to be able to study with him. And so mentors are amazing, but what really rocked my world at Clarion wasn't the mentors, it was the community and the idea of having a bunch of a peer group of folks who are at a similar place in their career as you, who like that's my sort of like spoiler alert on everything I've ever written. The superpower is community, and like being in community with people and like having people who are amazing, who can support you and help you grow is super important. So yeah, that's in line with what's been said before. Like mentors are awesome, and having a community of amazing folks by your side is even more awesome in my experience.
I agree with what everyone said about community, and partly because I didn't have any kind of community, writer community, until I already basically had a career. Because when I was starting out and I was younger, this relates back to me giving the advice of say yes to more things. I said no to a lot of stuff, including peer groups and things like that. I just basically hid, and I wrote on my own for years and years and years and didn't show anybody anything. And I'm sure that slowed me down in terms of getting, in terms of craft. I got there eventually, but I'm sure just grinding things through my own brain without any kind of outside input really wasn't helpful at all. So go find your community, whether it is a single mentor or a group of people. I think a group is really, the way to go, because then you get a number of voices, and you learn, when you hear a number of people critiquing your work, you learn something else that's real important, which is which criticism do you listen to and which criticism do you say nope to? There can be a lot of smart people in a critique group, and they can give you advice that has nothing to do with your story. And that is something I did learn in one group I was a member of, that like, oh, you're really smart and you have stuff to say. You're critiquing a story I didn't write. So thank you for the thoughtfulness, but yeah, no.
All those are very excellent answers, everyone. I think another thing that's also important to say is like in the fantasy, horror, and sci-fi community, like everyone's for the most part is like super friendly, and like I'm also like a younger writer and stuff and figuring things out. And when I've reached out to different writers to ask questions and whatnot, like people are usually like really nice and kind and will always give you like a thoughtful reply or something. So I think that's like an awesome thing to be part of, and to think about, like if you're a new writer, like people will be nice to you. Don't worry, just ask the questions. Yeah, so I shouldn't actually be the last person talking. That's awkward.
Well, I'll say, if I may,
yes,
you guys, everybody, Corey, in addition to being a great events organizer, is a phenomenal writer. And he has an amazing story in the anthology Tiny Nightmares, which is a great anthology you should all check out. So I plug Corey, and I thank Corey for pulling us together and plugging all of us.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you. Find all your work to read because you have a Sam recommendation. And I
thanks, because I have a Sam recommendation. That's so great. I really appreciate that, Sam. It means a lot to me. Having a good time right now. So the last thing we got to say again, I'm putting another link where you can buy all the writers' work into the chat. Traditionally, in a normal world, we would, at the end, we'd have a bunch of tables out back with all the books piled up, and you'd see all these cool hardcovers and soft covers, and you'd get autographs, and we'd talk, and it would be great. But that is not the world we're in right now, and I'm sorry there are not giant stacks of books for all of you to peruse. But online, there are giant stacks of books, an infinite stack of books, actually. So if you want to go to the chat, check the links. That'd be great. If not, no worries. So yeah, we've reached the final part of our program, which I'm going to allow everyone to be unmuted for 1 second, and everyone gets to clap. Okay, everyone gets to clap real quick. And once you've clapped, you need to sign off because we have to do a brief debrief. And after that, everyone have a wonderful night. So writers, if you can stick around, that'd be great. Everyone else, you get a chance to clap once I find the unmute button. Where's the unmute all button? Oh God, failing. Is there an unmute all button?
Uh-oh.
I'm gonna say there is not. I'm gonna stop recording.